they say land remembers. And if that's true, then every inch of our ranch in Montana held memories of my family, passed down like sacred stories in the wind. My name is Charlotte, and before I ever understood the weight of legacy or betrayal, I simply knew the warmth of that soil beneath my bare feet and the rhythm of life carved into every corner of our land. The ranch wasn't just property, it was our identity. It had been in our family for over 4 generations, originally built by my great-grandfather with calloused hands and an unbreakable spirit. He had crossed the country with little more than a wagon and a dream, settling in the rolling plains of Montana where the grass grew tall. The sky stretched wide, and freedom felt real. He planted the first trees with his sons, raised cattle and sheep, and built a life that was rough but full of purpose. My grandfather expanded the ranch and made it a home. He used to say, "The land is patient, it gives back what you put in, but only if you respect it." I remember watching him walk the fields at dawn, tipping his hat at the rising sun like it was an old friend. Every fence post, every trough, every tree on that land had a story, some of hardship, some of triumph, but all rooted in sacrifice. As a child, I didn't see it as work, I saw it as magic. I chased sheep through the fields with my little brother, learned to ride horses before I could ride a bike, and fell asleep many nights to the distant lowing of cows and the soft creak of trees swaying in the wind. My mother taught me how to milk the cows, my grandfather taught me how to spot storm clouds long before they rolled in. Life was simple, but it was rich. Before he passed, my grandfather gave my father one instruction: never sell this land. Pass it on to your children. Let it stay in our bloodline. It wasn't written down, but we all heard it. It was a promise spoken like a prayer. We believed my father would honor that. The ranch was more than an inheritance, it was a legacy of love, sweat, and survival. It taught me patience, responsibility, and the value of something that couldn't be replaced with money. I grew up believing that someday, my brother and I would carry that legacy forward. Back then, I never imagined the soil we played on, the trees we climbed, the animals we fed, all of it would be sold off, piece by piece, by the very man who was trusted to protect it. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew, as a little girl standing on that sacred land, was that our ranch was forever. That it was ours, and that it would always be home. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man who spoke often, but when he did, people listened. His voice was rough like worn leather, shaped by decades of ranch work and Montana winters. He didn't believe in long speeches or drawn-out sentiment, but every word he spoke carried weight, especially the ones he said before he died. I was only 14 when he passed, but I remember that week vividly. The ranch felt different. Quieter. The usual routines continued, animals still needed to be fed. Fields needed tending, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. My grandfather had been sick for months, and we all knew time was running out. A few days before he died, he called for my father. The two of them sat on the porch under the old cottonwood tree that had stood there longer than any of us. I watched from a distance, pretending to sweep the front steps, but really I was trying to catch pieces of their conversation. Grandpa's voice was softer than usual, almost like a whisper, but firm. I remember him saying, "You're the steward now, son. This ranch. It's not yours to sell. It's meant for the kids, your kids. Keep it in the family. Let it grow with them." He didn't need to write it down. In our family, your word was as good as your bond. Everyone knew that. My father nodded solemnly, agreeing without hesitation. He shook my grandfather's hand, the way men in our family always sealed promises. For a moment, I felt proud. Safe. Like everything my grandfather built would live on through us. He passed away 2 days later, in his sleep. The funeral was held on the hill behind the barn, where he always said he wanted to rest. We buried him next to his wife, my grandmother, beneath the shadow of the trees he planted when they were newlyweds. Dozens of neighbors and ranchers from miles around came to pay their respects. He was the kind of man people looked up to, even if they never knew his first name. After the burial, my father stood beside the grave, hands in his pockets, staring silently for a long time. I remember reaching for his hand, and he squeezed mine, just once. I believed then that he had taken the responsibility seriously, that he would honor Grandpa's wishes. But now, looking back, I wonder if something else was going through his mind that day. A seed of resentment? A sense of entitlement? Or maybe just a hunger that would later grow into selfishness? What I didn't understand at the time was that a promise made without accountability is just a memory waiting to be broken. And while my grandfather had trusted his son, he hadn't protected the ranch with a written will. There was no legal safeguard. Only faith, and faith, I would learn, wasn't enough to hold a legacy together. For a long time, I believed my father was a strong man. Stoic. Dependable. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he spoke with conviction. He had the rough hands of a rancher, the kind of presence that made others move aside when he walked into a room. I thought that silence meant strength. I mistook distance for dignity, but now I realize, he was just wearing a mask. In the months after Grandpa passed, the cracks in that mask began to show. Subtle at first. He stopped waking up early to check the fences or walk the property like he used to with Grandpa. He spent more time in town than at home. At first, we thought he was just grieving, trying to adjust. We gave him space. My mother noticed it before I did. She took over most of the chores without complaint. She fed the animals, fixed what she could, and quietly picked up the slack. She never said anything negative about him, not in front of us. But sometimes I'd see her watching the driveway long after sunset, hoping he'd come home before the kids went to bed. Most nights, he didn't. The ranch began to feel different. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like something sacred was slipping through our fingers. We stopped having family dinners at the long wooden table Grandpa built. My brother and I ate with Mom in the kitchen, while Dad, well, who knew where he was? Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. I remember my mother asking him if they could sit down and go over the ranch's finances together. His reaction was quick and cold. "I don't need anyone checking my books," he said sharply, eyes narrowing. "I know what I'm doing." But that wasn't true. Or maybe it was, and what he was doing had nothing to do with preserving the ranch at all. Around that time, he bought a new truck. Shiny, black, and far too expensive for someone who was supposedly struggling. He said it was an investment for hauling feed and supplies, but I never once saw it carrying anything other than his pride. He started wearing cologne. Got his hair trimmed more often. He wasn't becoming a better rancher, he was becoming a different man, a man who didn't come home with dirt on his boots but with the scent of whiskey on his breath. That's when I first began to feel uneasy. It was like the father I had known, the man who once lifted me onto horses and taught me how to whistle through my fingers, was slowly vanishing, replaced by someone unfamiliar. Someone hollow, but even then, I held on to hope. Maybe he was lost in grief. Maybe he would come around. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. His mask hadn't slipped, it was just starting to come off. While my father drifted further from us, spending more time in bars than barns, my mother quietly stepped forward, not with grand speeches or demands, but with action. She became the glue that held our family together, even as the pieces slowly fell apart. Mom was never one to complain. She didn't have time for it. She rose before dawn and worked long after the sun dipped behind the hills. While my father neglected his duties, she made sure the animals were fed, the fences mended, and the house still felt like a home. But her most tireless fight wasn't for the land, it was for me and my brother. When the school bills came due and my father refused to pay, claiming we needed to tighten our belts, it was Mom who found a way. She took a job at a nearby diner in town, working double shifts as a waitress. Her hands, once used to soft chores like kneading bread or brushing my hair, became blistered from carrying heavy trays and scrubbing dishes. Some nights, she came home exhausted, eyes red, back aching, but she'd still pack my lunch or press my uniform for the next day. She'd smile through the pain, pretending everything was fine, even when I knew the truth. We were barely getting by. Once, I overheard her on the phone with the school accountant, asking if we could pay my tuition in small installments. Her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. She didn't know I was listening. That night, she came into my room and told me, "You're going to finish school, Charlotte. No matter what it takes." She meant it. To help cover costs, she picked up a second job on weekends cleaning houses. I remember waiting for her outside one of the homes, big, modern places full of things we could never afford, while she scrubbed floors and polished counters. I used to sit on the curb with my books, pretending I was just doing homework, but inside, I hated that this was what life had become for her. Not once did my father offer to help. Not when the bills piled up. Not when the car broke down. Not even when Mom got sick for a week and still dragged herself to work because missing a shift meant missing a meal. She never resented the work, but I could see it in her eyes, how betrayed she felt. Not just by the man she married, but by the life they were supposed to build together. If anyone saved my future, it wasn't my father. It was her. She didn't wear a cape. She didn't ask for recognition. She simply got up every day and did what needed to be done, even when her heart was breaking. Looking back now, I realize she was the real backbone of our family. She was strength wrapped in grace. She was the hero I didn't know I had, until the world showed me what a villain looked like. It was a Thursday, overcast, dry, the kind of sky that felt heavy without ever opening up. I had just gotten off the school bus when I noticed something strange on the horizon. A low hum echoed across the fields. Not the familiar sound of livestock or wind rustling through trees, but the sharp, mechanical roar of chainsaws. As I approached the ranch, I could see clouds of sawdust rising like smoke. Men in hard hats and neon vests were all over the east field, our field, where the oldest trees on the ranch stood. Trees my great-grandfather planted with his bare hands. Trees that had watched over us through every season like guardians of our family's legacy. Now, they were being brought down, one after another, with a terrible crash that made my chest tighten. I ran home, tears already forming, and found my father leaning against his new truck, arms crossed, watching the destruction like it was a movie. I asked him what was happening, my voice shaking. Selling timber, he said simply, not even looking at me. Good money in it. But the trees, Grandpa's trees? I asked. Why didn't you tell us? He shrugged. They're just trees, Charlotte. We need the money. I didn't believe him, but I didn't dare argue. Not then. The real blow came later that day. I had been sent home from school again, this time, for unpaid fees. I handed him the letter from the school office, silently hoping that the money from the trees would go toward my education. He glanced at it, then tossed it aside. I don't have it, he said coldly, but you just sold all that wood. I said I don't have it. He snapped, his tone slicing through me sharper than any saw. I stood frozen, a knot forming in my throat. I wanted to yell, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. Years of being told to respect your father kept my lips sealed. Instead, I nodded and walked away, trying to hold back tears. Later that night, I watched from my bedroom window as a truck from the logging company drove away, loaded with what was left of our forest. My forest. The land looked naked now, stripped and hollow. Just like I felt, the next morning, I begged him to plant new trees. You could at least replace what you've taken, I said. If not for you, then for the future, for us. He laughed. Not kindly. Why would I plant what I won't live to see? That's your job. I realized then that he saw no future here. Not for me. Not for any of us. He wasn't harvesting the land, he was emptying it. One tree at a time, $1 at a time, one dream at a time, and I began to understand that the ranch wasn't just dying, it was being killed. The trees were just the beginning. After the logging crew was gone and the east field stood barren, my father's appetite for quick cash grew bolder. It was like something had changed in him completely, or maybe he'd just stopped pretending. One by one, the things that made the ranch a living, breathing home were put up for sale. It started with the cows. I came home one afternoon to find the main pasture eerily quiet. No soft lowing in the distance. No movement beneath the wind. I rushed out, heart pounding, only to find the gates wide open, and the corral half empty. Our prized Holsteins, some of which my grandfather raised himself, were gone. I ran to my mother in a panic. She already knew. Your father sold them this morning, she said softly, not looking up from the sink. Why? We need them for milk, for income, for everything. Her hands trembled in the dishwater. He says we'll get by. He says it's his land. But I knew the truth. That money wasn't going back into the ranch. It was going into his pockets, and from there, straight into town. Into beer. Into women. Into reckless nights that bled into dead mornings. Soon, the sheep were next. Then the old tractor. Even our hay bales were sold off to neighbors while we watched the barn grow emptier by the week. My mother tried to talk to him. She begged. She reminded him of Grandpa's last words, the legacy we were supposed to protect. But he wouldn't hear any of it. He'd just wave her off with a cold smile and say, "Let me live a little before I die." He called it living. But all I saw was destruction. He came home late most nights, sometimes drunk, sometimes with the smell of perfume clinging to his clothes. He didn't care that the fences were falling apart, or that we were running out of firewood, or that my school shoes had holes in them. He strutted around like a man who owned the world. While the world he actually owned fell into ruin. Once, I asked him why he was selling everything. Why he was throwing away everything our family had built. He looked at me with glassy eyes and said, "Because I can. No one's stopping me." And he was right. No one could stop him. The land, the livestock, the tools, everything was in his name. My grandfather had trusted him, and that trust had become a weapon. Each sale felt like another nail in the coffin of our family's future. Our ranch wasn't just being dismantled, it was being pawned off, piece by piece. Every animal carted away, every tool traded for a night's thrill, was another part of our legacy sold to strangers. And while he spent that money on empty pleasures, we stayed behind with empty fields, empty cupboards, and hearts full of bitterness. Our dreams weren't just for sale, they were being stolen in plain sight. I waited until the timing felt right, though nothing about life on the ranch felt right anymore. It was a Sunday morning, the only time Dad seemed somewhat grounded. He was sitting on the porch, sipping his coffee, legs kicked up on the wooden railing, the empty landscape stretching out before him. What used to be thick with trees was now nothing but stumps and dry wind. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Dad," I said, careful with my tone, "can I talk to you?" He didn't look up. "You're already talking." I paused. "It's about the land. The trees." He gave a small, tired sigh. "Charlotte, we've already been through this." "No," I said more firmly now, standing in front of him. "You've talked. I've stayed quiet. But this time I need you to really hear me." He glanced up then. Eyes half-lidded, the way someone looks when they've already decided they're not interested. I continued anyway. "The trees you cut down weren't just lumber. They were part of the ranch, part of what made this place alive. Grandpa planted them with intention. He said they were for the future, for us. And if we don't replant, then what's left of that vision dies." He sipped his coffee, silent. I pressed on. "The ranch is drying up, but it doesn't have to. We can start small. I've been researching tree planting programs. We could apply for help." "We could." Stop, he cut in. My heart dropped. He set his cup down and stood up slowly, stretching his back like the conversation bored him. "You don't get it, do you? I've spent my whole life working this land. Taking orders from my old man. Watching him pour everything into dirt and trees and cows like it was all that mattered. And what did it get him? A heart attack and a pile of regrets." "That's not true," I tried to interrupt, but he held up his hand. "Let me finish. I'm not planting trees I'll never see grow. I'm not breaking my back for a future that doesn't include me. You want trees? Plant your own when you're grown. But don't ask me to waste what time I've got left waiting on roots to sprout." I stood there, stunned. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or turn away. "I'm not wasting time," I said, voice trembling. "I'm trying to save what little we have left." He shook his head and walked past me, stepping off the porch like the conversation had never happened. "You don't get it, Charlotte. I'm not looking back anymore. But that was the problem, he wasn't looking forward either. As he disappeared into the driveway, I stared out at the barren fields, where only ghosts of trees remained. The ranch was still breathing, but just barely. And with every refusal, my father wasn't just rejecting trees, he was rejecting hope, and hope, like soil, can only take so much before it stops growing anything at all. Growing up, the word respect was sacred in our household. It was laced into every conversation, every correction, every unspoken rule. Respect your father, my mother would say when he raised his voice. Respect his decisions, relatives reminded me when I questioned his actions. And so I did. Out of fear, out of love, out of tradition, I kept my mouth shut, but silence has a weight of its own. As a child, I believed my father was larger than life. He was the man who lifted hay bales like they were feathers, who knew how to fix anything with nothing but wire and willpower. When he spoke, his voice carried finality, and when he frowned, the whole room shrank. So I learned early that obedience earned peace, and questions earned punishment. Even when things started falling apart, that early training stuck. When the cows disappeared and the fields emptied, I still called him sir. When he laughed in my face about replanting the trees, I said thank you for listening. Not because I agreed, but because I'd been taught that questioning your father was dishonor. Especially in our family, where legacy was everything, and legacy began with loyalty. But what happens when the man you're supposed to respect uses that loyalty as a shield? I kept quiet as he sold the livestock, even when I knew the ranch couldn't survive without them. I bit my tongue when he spent money meant for my tuition on booze and gambling. I stayed silent when he insulted my mother, when he vanished for days, when he pretended we didn't need him. I was obedient, but I was breaking. Every act of betrayal felt like a slap I wasn't allowed to block. I remember nights lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it made me a bad daughter to hate the way he lived. To hate the way he made us live. But hate was too strong a word. It wasn't hate, it was hurt. Deep, unshakable hurt. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him and ask, why are you doing this to us? But instead, I swallowed the words again and again. Because respect meant holding your tongue. Because respect meant enduring, but it also meant pretending the ranch didn't feel like a graveyard. Pretending his actions were justified. Pretending I didn't want to walk away from it all just to breathe again. One day, my mother looked at me as I cleaned the dishes in silence after another one of his outbursts. She placed her hand on mine and whispered, respect is earned, not demanded. It was the first time I realized I had a choice, but even knowing that, it took years before I stopped mistaking silence for strength. I still called him Dad. I still held the door open when he walked past. But something in me had shifted. Respect, I had learned, should never cost you your voice, and mine had stayed buried long enough. It didn't happen all at once, it never does. The death of a dream doesn't come with sirens or explosions. It comes quietly. Softly. One animal at a time. The first to go were the Holsteins, the lifeblood of the ranch. Their absence was glaring. The barn echoed with a strange hollowness in the mornings. No low, gentle moos. No warmth of bodies pressed together. I used to wake up early just to help feed them, brushing their hides, whispering to them like they were old friends. I never even got to say goodbye. Next came the sheep, my brother, Sam, and I used to name them as kids. Fluffy, Buttons, Storm. We pretended they were our pets, even though we knew better. They'd follow us around the field like we were part of the herd. One afternoon, I came home from school and found their pen empty. Not even a tuft of wool left behind. No explanation, no warning, just gone. I remember staring at the empty enclosure, gripping the fence post so hard my knuckles turned white. It felt like each animal that left took a piece of my childhood with it. A piece of our future. The goats followed. Then the chickens. Then the old draft horse, the one too old to work but too loved to lose, sold for barely enough to buy a round of drinks. With every sale, the ranch grew quieter. The sounds that had once defined our days, the clucking, the bleating, the rhythmic jingling of cowbells, faded into memory. The fields looked more like abandoned lots than pastureland. The barn, once bustling with life, was nothing but empty stalls and the ghosts of what used to be. I asked my father once why he didn't just stop. "We still have time," I pleaded. "We can rebuild. If we stop now, if we take care of what's left." He shook his head, already distracted by the keys in his hand, eager to leave for another night in town. "What's the point, Charlotte? It's just a ranch. Just animals. They come and go. We'll get by." But we weren't getting by. We were falling apart. My mother stopped talking much. She spent more time in the garden, though even that had started to wilt from neglect. Sam was away at school, far enough to escape the collapse but close enough to call every week and ask if it was really as bad as it sounded. It was worse. Every sale felt like another thread unraveling in a once tightly woven family legacy. My grandfather's vision was dissolving under the weight of my father's carelessness. This land wasn't just where we lived, it was who we were. And with each goat, each sheep, each cow loaded into a trailer and driven away, our identity faded just a little more. We were being dismantled, not by force, but by indifference. And the saddest part was knowing no one was coming to stop it. If the ranch was crumbling in silence, the city bars were alive with the sound of my father's laughter. It was a cruel contrast. While we counted coins for groceries, he was shouting drinks for people who couldn't even remember his last name. His real home was no longer the ranch passed down through generations. It was the row of worn-out bar stools lined up along Main Street in the nearest town. He had found a new audience there. A crowd that didn't care about his responsibilities, his family, or the land he was slowly destroying. In those dimly lit rooms, he wasn't a failed rancher or a father on the run from his past, he was just Big Al. The guy with the stories, the wallet full of cash, and the willingness to pay for anyone's good time. At first, the drinking was a weekend ritual. Then it became nightly. He would disappear after sunset and return in the early morning, reeking of alcohol, with rumpled clothes and bloodshot eyes. Sometimes, he wouldn't come home at all. On those nights, my mother left his dinner on the table anyway, covered with a plate, as if some part of her still hoped he'd return with purpose. He never did. The money he got from selling off the livestock and timber wasn't reinvested or saved. It vanished into pitchers of beer, tips for bartenders, and the greedy hands of hangers-on who flattered him while his pockets were full. They called him legend, boss, king of the prairie. And he believed them. He basked in their praise like it meant more than the years of work our family had poured into the ranch. I once caught him bragging at a local tavern when I went to pick him up after a neighbor called. He had a crowd around him, telling stories about hunting elk with Grandpa, stories he never actually lived. They laughed like he was royalty. I stood by the door, invisible, waiting for him to notice me. He never did. Eventually, the money started running dry, and so did the crowd. The bar tabs stacked higher, the smiles faded, and one by one, his so-called friends disappeared. When he could no longer foot the bill, the bartenders stopped pouring, and the flattery turned to indifference. Back home, my mother kept working minimum wage jobs just to keep the lights on. I was juggling school and part-time work. The ranch had lost its soul, and its owner had sold his integrity for a temporary illusion of importance. He didn't care that he was burning through a legacy. That with every drink, every late night, every forgotten promise, he was choosing strangers in smoky rooms over the family waiting for him in silence. He traded bloodlines for bar tabs, and when the money ran out, and the applause ended, the ranch he abandoned and the family he ignored were all he had left. But by then, we had nothing more to give. Our house never echoed with shouting. That might have been easier. At least then, the anger would have had somewhere to go. But in our home, silence was the weapon of choice, and the battlefield stretched from the kitchen to the front porch, where my mother and father passed each other like strangers under the same roof. My mother had always been a quiet woman, but this silence was different. It wasn't peace, it was pressure. A pressure that built every time my father stumbled in past midnight, stinking of alcohol and arrogance, his boots dragging in dust from the outside but leaving something heavier behind. By then, the ranch was almost unrecognizable. The barn stood empty, the fences sagged, and the pastures grew wild with weeds, yet my father still walked around like a man in charge, pretending the walls weren't caving in. My mother, meanwhile, cleaned the same counters twice, triple-checked the bills, and worked extra shifts just to afford milk and flour. She didn't cry, not in front of us, but her eyes were red more often than not. They didn't argue openly. Instead, they spoke through door slams, cold dinners, and the creak of separate bedroom doors closing at night. My father stopped sitting at the table. My mother stopped asking where he went. I stopped trying to pretend things would fix themselves. Every now and then, they would exchange a sentence or two, sharp, short, loaded. "We need that money for Charlotte's school." My mother once said flatly, "I'll handle it," my father replied, without looking up from the newspaper he wasn't reading, but he never handled it. I watched them drift further apart each day, the love that once connected them eroded by disappointment and betrayal. She had stood beside him for years, believing in the man he could be. But now, she was just surviving beside the man he had become. The tension was so thick that even the walls seemed to sag with the weight of what wasn't said. Every footstep sounded louder. Every closed door felt like another line drawn in their quiet war, and in the middle of it all, I stood torn. I loved them both in different ways. My mother for her strength, her quiet resilience, her endless sacrifices. My father, for what he once was. For the stories I'd heard of how he worked beside my grandfather, how he used to hold me on his shoulders when I was little and point out constellations. That version of him was fading fast, replaced by someone I barely recognized, but my mother saw through the illusion long before I did. She stopped pleading. She stopped asking. Instead, she focused on what she could control, keeping me in school, keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table, and though she never raised her voice, her defiance was clear. In the silence of that crumbling home, she stood her ground. Not with fury, but with quiet strength. And somehow, that hurt him more than shouting ever could. It happened on a Tuesday, no warning, no family discussion, just a knock at the door, a stranger in polished shoes, and a folded contract clutched in my father's hand. That was the day the ranch, our legacy, our lifeline, our last thread of hope, was sold. He didn't even look guilty. I had just come home from school, exhausted from juggling classes and my part-time job, only to find the living room filled with whispers and tension. My mother stood frozen in the corner, her hands trembling around a dish towel, staring at the papers like they were death certificates. My father sat calmly in his armchair, flipping through pages like they were nothing more than junk mail. "You sold it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up. "It's done," he muttered, as if it were just another chore checked off a list. My knees gave way, and I sank onto the nearest chair, the words echoing through my mind like church bells at a funeral. It was really gone. The land my grandfather had nurtured, the home my mother had protected, the soil where I'd taken my first steps, sold off like a used car. He justified it the way he justified everything. "Too much to maintain," he said. "We weren't making money. Better to get something out of it now than nothing later." But it wasn't his to give away, not really. It was passed down through generations, guarded by blood, sweat, and sacrifice. My grandfather hadn't left a will, but he'd left clear intentions: keep the ranch in the family. Let it be the foundation for future generations. Let it grow with us, but none of that mattered now. A week later, trucks arrived. Men with chainsaws, bulldozers, and construction tape surveyed the land like it was a blank canvas instead of sacred ground. The new owners planned to build a luxury hunting lodge, something fancy for city dwellers looking to play cowboy on weekends. I remember standing at the edge of the property, watching the old oak tree, my grandfather's favorite, being marked for removal. My chest tightened as memories flooded in, Sam and I climbing its branches, my mother reading beneath its shade, my grandfather sharpening his tools beside it, all of it, gone for a quick payout and a bottle of whiskey. We had nothing left. No land. No livestock. No heritage. Just a small envelope of money my father refused to share, and a house we'd soon be asked to vacate. My mother didn't cry. She packed our things in silence, her expression unreadable, but I knew she was breaking inside. "Sam sent word from North Dakota, come live with me, both of you. You don't belong there anymore." We didn't. Not without the ranch. The night before we left, I stood in the empty barn one last time. Dust hung in the air like ghosts. I ran my hand along the wooden beams and whispered goodbye to a place that had been more than home. It had been a part of us, and now, it was just another address on someone else's deed. Leaving the ranch wasn't just about packing boxes and closing a door, it was letting go of an entire identity. One I never thought I'd have to live without. The land had raised me. Its winds had whispered stories, its soil had held my roots. But as we drove away in an old borrowed pickup truck, all I saw in the rearview mirror was a graveyard of memories. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a place where people reinvented themselves, where nobody knew your last name or what legacy had been lost. But I didn't arrive at university like the others. There were no proud parents carrying mini fridges, no sentimental goodbyes or pictures on the dorm steps. It was just me, a second-hand duffel bag, and a lump in my throat that never seemed to go away. Everything around me felt unnatural. Cold. Unfamiliar. Concrete buildings replaced open pastures. Class schedules replaced sunrises and chores. The smell of manure and hay was gone, replaced with the sterile scent of polished floors and cafeteria grease. Everyone walked with purpose, heads buried in phones or books. While I still felt suspended between two worlds, one buried in dust, the other paved in pressure, but I had no choice. There was no home to run back to. I buried myself in studies. Not out of ambition, but survival. I couldn't afford distractions. While my roommates were going out to parties or taking weekend trips, I was working double shifts at the campus library and tutoring in the evenings. Every dollar counted. Every hour was a trade, time for a meal, a bus fare, a textbook. Some nights, I'd lie in my bunk bed and replay the sounds of the ranch in my head, the creak of the barn doors, the clink of cowbells, the sound of my mother humming while hanging laundry. I missed the stars. I missed the silence that didn't feel lonely. But more than anything, I missed the feeling of belonging to something real, something earned. At school, I learned to adapt. To blend. But the pain of where I came from never left. It became a quiet engine inside me, fuel for every paper I wrote, every exam I passed. I wasn't just trying to build a life, I was trying to prove something, that the story didn't have to end in ruin. That I could rise from what had been stripped away. My mother checked in when she could. Sam sent care packages, ramen, socks, handwritten notes with dad jokes only brothers could get away with. They kept me going, those small reminders that even though we had lost the ranch, we hadn't lost everything. But I never heard from my father. Not once. No apology. No explanation. Just silence, louder than any words he could have said, and so I kept moving forward, one step at a time, from soil to concrete, from broken roots to a life I would build with my own two hands. Success didn't arrive with fanfare. It came in slow, quiet victories, like when I paid my last tuition bill without asking for help. Or when I received my acceptance letter to a graduate program in pharmaceutical sciences. It came when my brother, Sam, called me with excitement crackling through the phone, telling me he'd just landed a job as a licensed electrical engineer in North Dakota. We had done it. Against the odds. Despite the wreckage our father left behind, and through it all, our mother was our anchor. She never bragged, never posted about it like the parents of my classmates did. But I saw the pride in her eyes when she visited me at graduation. She wore the same second-hand dress she'd saved for years, her hair pulled back in the simplest bun, and a small bouquet clutched in her weathered hands. She didn't need to say a word. Her smile said it all. You made it. We made it. Sam flew in for the ceremony. We stood on either side of her, both of us in our caps and gowns from separate schools, and she cried, not the tears of a woman worn down by life, but of one who had survived it. She had raised 2 children on minimum wage jobs and heartbreak, and now we stood tall, not just as adults, but as her legacy. Meanwhile, my father's life unraveled like an old coat missing too many threads. Rumors reached us slowly. He'd left Montana and drifted to Los Angeles. He was living in a shelter, occasionally seen at street corners, his once commanding presence reduced to a mumbling shadow. The man who once boasted about being the king of the ranch now wandered alleys asking for change. Relatives called us now and then. They asked us to send him money, to remember he was still our father. They used guilt like a fishing line, hoping we'd bite. But neither Sam nor I did. He sold our future for bar tabs, Sam said bluntly. He can drink the rewards. I didn't speak with the same venom, but the pain still lived inside me. I had tried for years to understand him, to find some sliver of remorse in his choices. But there was none. He'd never apologized. Never called. Never once asked if we were okay. The truth was, he wasn't ashamed of what he did, he only regretted that he ended up alone. But my mother, she carried her dignity with grace. She never told us to hate him, never poisoned us with bitterness. She just reminded us to keep walking forward, that our story didn't have to end like his. And so, we did. We didn't rise to prove him wrong, we rose because she believed we could. He may have left us with nothing, but she gave us everything: strength, courage, and a heart that never stopped beating for her children. She was our pride, he was our past. The message came through a distant cousin, one of those extended family members who only ever reached out when they wanted something. She called out of the blue, her voice heavy with forced concern, as if she were trying to guilt-trip me before even saying hello. "Charlotte, it's about your father," she said. I paused, holding the phone tighter. That name still struck a chord I wasn't ready to face. He's in Los Angeles. Homeless. People have seen him downtown, near the shelters on Skid Row. My heart didn't leap. My stomach didn't drop. I felt nothing at first. Just silence. The kind that creeps in when you're trying to measure what, if anything, you're supposed to feel. She continued rambling, how he looked gaunt, older than his years, how he mumbled to himself about the ranch, about his kids. She said he still wore the same cowboy boots he used to stomp around in back home. They were torn now, barely holding together, but he wouldn't take them off. He's not well, she added. He talks to anyone who'll listen, saying the ranch was stolen from him, that he was betrayed. He even tells people his daughter's some big-time doctor who turned her back on him. That part made me laugh bitterly. Of course he told it that way. Of course he'd rewrite history to make himself the victim. The man who sold our legacy for bar tabs and hollow friendships now wanted pity from strangers, and possibly from us. He needs help, Charlotte. Maybe just a little support. A roof, a meal. You're doing well, right? There it was. The pitch. The guilt. The attempt to remind me of the blood that bound us. But blood isn't loyalty. Blood doesn't absolve you of the damage you cause. I remembered being turned away from school because fees hadn't been paid, even as the sounds of chainsaws echoed from the woods behind our house. I remembered the empty barns, the animals gone one by one, the look in my mother's eyes when he signed away the ranch like it was some burden. And now, the man who once sat in our grandfather's chair like a king was living on a city sidewalk, surrounded by concrete, clinging to stories no one believed. I thanked the cousin politely, ended the call, and sat alone for a long time. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. But pity isn't the same as forgiveness. And I owed him neither. Sam didn't hesitate when I told him. He made his choices, he said. He picked a bottle over us. Let him live with it. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I pictured him under a dim street light, still telling stories to strangers, still wearing those old boots like they were armor, homeless in LA, not because the world was cruel, but because he had burned every bridge he ever stood on. And we were the ashes he left behind. It always starts the same way, a private number flashing across my phone screen, interrupting a quiet moment. My stomach tightens. My hands freeze. I don't need to answer. I already know who it is, my father. He never had the decency to show up when we needed him, but now, when his world has crumbled to dust, he remembers how to dial a number. The calls come more often now, usually late at night. Maybe he thinks I'll be more vulnerable then, half asleep, tired, softened by the silence. But I let them ring. Every time, I can't bring myself to block the number. Some part of me, maybe the child I used to be, wants to believe he'll say the words I've waited to hear my whole life. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But he never leaves a voicemail. Just lets the ringtone speak for him. It rings like a ghost knocking on a door I refuse to open. The relatives started calling too. Some with pleading voices, others with judgment. He's still your father, Charlotte, they say, like that title should erase everything he did. They act like blood is a get-out-of-jail-free card. Like we owe him redemption just because we share a name. He's sick, one aunt whispered like it was a sacred confession. He doesn't have much time. But when did he care about time? When Mom begged him to stop drinking and think about the future. When Sam and I cried for help, for tuition, for basic things like food and shoes? He had time then. He just chose to waste it. I don't hate him. Not anymore. Hate takes energy. Hate requires a connection. What I feel is something heavier, disappointment dipped in grief. It's mourning a man who is still alive. But only a shell of who he could have been. Who he was supposed to be. Sometimes, when my phone rings and I see that number, I stare at it for a while. Not because I want to answer, but because I wonder if it will ever stop. If one day the calls will cease and I'll find out he died on a bench, with nothing but a torn photograph of the ranch in his pocket, and even then. I don't know if I'd cry. My mother never tells me what to do. She doesn't judge. But I see it in her eyes when the topic comes up, the quiet hope that I'll find peace, whatever that means. Sam, on the other hand, has no such patience. He earned this life, he says with cold finality. Let him live it. And so I let the phone ring. Every time it does, it reminds me of everything we lost, and everything I've built in spite of it. I've learned to answer to my own needs now, to choose peace over obligation. Some calls were never meant to be answered, and some fathers were never meant to be saved. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves, soft, unexpected, and quiet. It started showing up in the smallest places, in the silence of early mornings, in the gentle rhythm of my work, and in the laughter I shared with people who chose to love me without condition. For a long time, I believed I was running from my past. Now I understand, I was running towards something better. My work in pharmaceutical research had become more than a career. It was purpose. Each day, I poured myself into helping people live longer, healthier lives, ironic, considering how little my father had valued his own. In my office, framed next to my degrees, is a photo of my mother smiling at my graduation. A symbol of everything I've overcome. Every patient we helped, every breakthrough we reached, felt like a personal answer to the question my childhood always asked, was it worth it? Yes. It was. Relationships, too, taught me that not all men become their fathers. I met someone kind. Steady. A man who listened when I spoke and never made me feel small for having survived what I did. When I told him about the ranch, about my father, about the phone calls I no longer answered, he didn't try to fix me. He just sat with me in the heaviness and helped me breathe through it. Healing came not through confrontation, but acceptance. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped expecting closure from the person who broke things in the first place. I realized I didn't need him to rebuild what he destroyed. I was already standing tall, stronger, wiser, and freer than I'd ever been. Mom moved in with Sam. She finally had the comfort she never asked for but always deserved. She tended to her little garden, read mystery novels in the sun, and took long walks without looking over her shoulder. We visited often. She was proud of both of us, not for our success, but for our hearts, how we never let bitterness become our legacy. As for the ranch, it was gone. Sold, repurposed, paved over. But I'd stopped dreaming of reclaiming it. My roots weren't tied to the soil anymore. They were in the strength I carried, the values I upheld, and the life I chose to build. Legacy isn't land. It's what you leave behind in people. And my mother's legacy lived on through me. People still asked sometimes, about my father, about whether I ever forgave him. I didn't have an answer that fit neatly in words. What I did know was that forgiveness didn't mean letting someone back in. Sometimes, forgiveness was simply choosing not to let them take up space in your heart anymore. I didn't rewrite my past, but I rewrote what came next. And in doing so, I ended a cycle generation old, with peace, not revenge. People love to romanticize forgiveness. They say it's the final step in healing, the noble thing to do. But I've come to learn that some wounds don't need to be forgiven, they need to be understood, accepted, and left behind. I used to wrestle with the idea. For years, I questioned myself, was I cold? Was I heartless for refusing to answer his calls? But time, distance, and pain have taught me something forgiveness never could: self-respect. My father wasn't just flawed. He was reckless with our lives. He made conscious choices, over and over, that hurt the people who loved him. He saw our future, mine, Sam's, and Mom's, as disposable, something he could trade in for a night of pleasure or a moment of power. Forgiveness implies he didn't know better. But he did. And he chose himself anyway. I'm not angry anymore. That's the part people misunderstand. I've simply drawn a boundary I'll never step across again. I built a life where his shadow no longer follows me, where my peace is sacred. Compassion is not the same as surrender. I can wish him well from afar. I can acknowledge his suffering without inviting it into my life, but forgiveness? That's not a gift I owe him. He used to say he wanted to live before he died. And he did, at our expense. Now I choose to live too, but not out of spite. Out of survival. Out of love for myself and those who never gave up on me. He may still be my father by name. But the man who sold our legacy for liquor and lies, that's someone I'll never forgive, and that's a decision I finally feel proud of. Do you have a similar story? We will like to know it. Write in the comment section. Please subscribe for more family revenge stories.